Have you ever stopped to think about how Jesus' calm transformed the most chaotic situations? In a world filled with pressure, where we are constantly bombarded by challenges and distractions, the power of calm that Jesus demonstrated can seem almost unattainable. But what if I told you that his teachings on calm were not only applicable in his time, but are exactly what we need to live in peace today? Jesus' life was marked by moments of profound serenity, even in the face of the greatest adversity, and each of these moments teaches us something fundamental about how to face chaos without losing inner peace. In this video, we'll explore how Jesus showed us that true strength comes from calm, and how we can apply these teachings to the most complicated situations in our lives. But it is the last teaching. It is the most important of all. So stay until the end and discover what makes this last teaching so crucial to our lives and to finding the power of calm we all seek. Number 1. Calm in chaos. Jesus sleeping during a storm. Have you ever felt like you were in the middle of a storm, surrounded by problems and anxieties, not knowing where to run? It seems that the more we try to solve things, the more complicated they become. This is when most of us start to lose control, anxiety takes over, and calm seems like a distant reality. Modern life is full of uncertainty, of external pressures that leave us on the verge of exhaustion, like a boat trying to sink. But it is exactly in these moments that Jesus' teachings about calm become essential, offering a new perspective, a way to face chaos without being consumed by it. In one of the most iconic episodes in the Gospels, we find Jesus and his disciples in the midst of a fierce storm as they cross the Sea of Galilee. The storm was so violent that the waves threatened to capsize the boat, filling it with water, while the desperate disciples tried to control the situation. In the midst of the panic, where was Jesus? He was sleeping soundly. This image alone is disconcerting. How can anyone sleep in the middle of a storm? It's not what we all would do. Most of us would be like the disciples, struggling to maintain control, running from side to side, trying to break the uncontrollable. But Jesus, with his extraordinary calm, the disciples, seeing the situation, cannot understand. They ran to Jesus, agreeing with him in a hurry, saying, "Master, do you not care if we die?" Gospel of Mark chapter 4, verse 38, and this is where the real lesson begins. Jesus stands up, looks at the storm, and with just one word, calms it. "Hush, calm down." Gospel of Mark chapter 4, verse 39. In an instant, the wind ceased, and the sea became calm, as never before. The outer chaos was replaced by an overwhelming peace, but that was not the real lesson. The focus of this story is not on Jesus' ability to excite the physical storm, but rather on his inner calm, which was undisturbed from the beginning. What Jesus wanted to teach his disciples was not simply about their ability to control nature, but about the importance of cultivating inner calm, even in the most desperate situations. When Jesus said to them, "Why are you so afraid? I still don't have faith." Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, verse 40. He was pointing to something much deeper. The real storm was not at sea, but within the hearts of the disciples. And this is what Jesus teaches us by his example. True peace does not depend on external statistics, but on the state of our hearts. Imagine the impact of this on your life. We often let ourselves be carried away by situations, believing that peace will only come when the problems are resolved. But Jesus shows us otherwise. Peace begins within us, no matter what we are celebrating on the outside. And this storm is not a promise that things will not come, but rather that we can face them with unshakable calm, trusting that God is not in control. A storm may be around us, but it doesn't have to be within us. Jesus invites us to trust in God, just as he rested in the boat. This is a calm that comes from faith, from the certainty that, no matter how terrible a storm is, God never loses control. This is why Jesus was able to sleep peacefully, while the winds were blowing at him. He knew that, when the time was right, everything would be under control. The same applies to us. When we trust in God, calm stops being a circumstantial response and becomes a constant state, a choice of faith. When reflecting on this, the lesson that Jesus leaves us is clear. Calm is an act of faith. It's not about ignoring problems, but about trusting that, even in the midst of them, God is present. He does not abandon us in the storm. He is by our side, teaching us to trust and maintain inner peace, regardless of what happens around us. 2. Jesus' silence in the face of accusations. Imagine yourself in a situation where you are falsely accused. Their immediate instinct is to defend themselves, to prove themselves right, to show others that they are the ones in the wrong. Now think about how much anxiety this generates, how the heart races, the mind agitates, and each word spoken only increases the tension. It's a familiar scenario for many of us, moments when we are wronged and feel compelled to fight for our truth. Now compare this occurrence to Jesus' behavior during his trial before Pilate. He who had all the truth on his side remained silent. He who could easily have proven his innocence and exposed the lies of his accusers chose the path of silence and calm. When Jesus was brought before Pilate, he had already been betrayed, humiliated, and violently mistreated. The atmosphere was one of total hostility, with crowds chanting for his crucifixion. However, faced with all the accusations made against him, Jesus did not defend himself. He sat silently, refusing to answer, even when Pilate, it seemed by his demeanor, questioned him directly. But Jesus did not answer him. Word so that the governor was very clear. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27 verse 14. This moment reveals a depth of inner calm that goes beyond ordinary human understanding. How can someone remain silent when their life is at risk? How can anyone choose serenity when all the evidence is against him? The answer is in Jesus' absolute faith in God's plan. He knew that the purpose of his life did not depend on Pilate's accusations or decisions. His mission was greater than any human judgment, and therefore he did not need to defend himself. Jesus trusted that divine justice would prevail, even when earthly justice failed. This teaching applies directly to our everyday lives. We often face unfair processes, misunderstandings, and hasty judgments. Our tendency is to react quickly, looking under the circumstances, as our value depends on the opinion of others. However, Jesus shows us a different path, the power of silence. There are times when the most powerful defense we can have is silence, the trust that God sees what others do not. Just like Jesus, we don't need to prove our innocence every time. Sometimes silence is the greatest show of strength, because it reflects an unshakable inner peace. When we maintain this calm, we are practicing trust. We trust that, at the right time, the truth will prevail. We trust that God is pleased even when statements seem unfair. This does not mean that we should accept everything passively, or that we should never defend ourselves. But it does mean that when our trust is in God, we can choose our moments of identity wisely, knowing that ours is not dependent on the claims or declarations of others. Jesus, by choosing silence, also declared that not all battles need to be fought with words. He knew his silence spoke more than any verbal defense could, and the impact was profound. Pilate, a man accustomed to interrogations and trials, remained calm. Jesus' silence conveyed a confidence that disarmed human power, a serenity that confused even the same Roman governor. This teaching challenges us to compensate for our occurrence in the face of adversity. What would happen if, instead of always justifying ourselves, we embraced silence as a sign of faith? If, instead of trying to control every narrative about us, we trusted that God knows the truth? By doing this, we would not only be imitating Jesus' example, but also allowing calm to transform the way we live and deal with challenges. Jesus' silence was not empty, but full of meaning. It was a silence that said, "My trust is in something greater." It was a silence that paradoxically spoke about the power of faith and serenity. 3. Calm in moments of injustice. How many times have you felt powerless in the face of injustice in the world? Maybe you witnessed something wrong, something that hurts your sense of justice, but the pressure to move on and not get involved is great. What we do in these moments reveals a lot about what we carry inside. Are we satisfied with the calm and compassion that Jesus taught us? The parable of the Good Samaritan is a profound example of how calm, combined with love, drives us to act differently from indifference in an unfair and hurried world. The story is known. A Jewish man, injured and on the verge of death, was ignored by a priest and a Levite, both religious who, driven by haste and their own international justifications, moved on. They didn't want to get involved, they didn't want to be delayed in their missions, and who could blame them? It was a dangerous road, and perhaps that man was already dead. However, the Samaritan, who according to the culture of the time should have been the least supported to help, was the one who demonstrated calm and compassion. He not only stopped, but also cared for the man with his own resources and time, showing that calm in times of injustice is not passivity, but a deliberate action of mercy. The occurrence of the Samaritan teaches us a fundamental lesson. True calm is active. He could have moved on, ignored the problem, and avoided the difficulty. But what he did was exactly the opposite. He interrupted his journey, put himself at risk, and offered time and resources to help someone who, by social logic, did not deserve his attention. It is this calm, this pause in the rush, that allows us to see others as human beings worthy of care and compassion. In the context of our everyday lives, This parable challenges us to do the same. We live in a world where we are consistently determined to move forward, to prioritize our own interests, and to dodge other people's problems. But Jesus' example shows us that true calm enables us to stop and help. It's not just a feeling of inner peace, but a choice to act compassionately in a world that constantly encourages us to be indifferent. Jesus concludes the questioned parable. Which of these three do you think was the neighbor of the man who fell into the hands of robbers? Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, verse 36. The answer is obvious, but the impact of this answer goes further. It's not just about who helped, but about the fact that the help came from someone who, in society's eyes, was inviting. This detail teaches us that calm and compassion do not depend on our social position, religion, or status, but rather on our inner willingness to be guided by God's grace. This act of calm is something we can apply in our daily lives. When we see injustice happening, whether in the workplace, at home, or in society, the attempt is to move forward, like the first two men in the parable. The rush, the fear of getting involved, or even the rationalization that it is not our problem, paralyzes us. But Jesus challenges us to do things differently, to stop and act with love. True calm gives us this courage. It allows us to see that, even in situations of injustice, we can still be instruments of compassion and change. Just as the Samaritan did not hesitate to place his hands on the man's wound, we are also called to act concretely, without rushing, without fear. Calm allows us to have the clarity necessary to see the suffering of others and act with mercy. This does not mean solving all the world's problems, but it means being available to help when we are called, even when it requires sacrifices. Therefore, the parable of the Good Samaritan teaches us that calm is not just an emotional response, but a moral and spiritual choice. It is an act of faith that leads us to act, even in the face of injustice and pain. And in doing so, we follow the example of Jesus, who taught us that true peace and true calm come from a willingness to love, regardless of situations. 4. The power of calm in Jesus' solitary prayer. Have you noticed how uncomfortable silence can be for many of us? We live in a noisy world where time seems to run at a frantic pace, and we have become accustomed to always being surrounded by noise, information, and distractions. For many, the idea of retreating to a solitary place in silence seems like an escape or a waste of time. But for Jesus, these moments of solitude and prayer were essential. He knew that true peace is not found in the middle of the race, but in the silence, where we can reconnect with God and ourselves. Throughout the Gospels, we see Jesus frequently moving away from the crowds to pray in deserted and lonely places. In Luke chapter 5 verse 16, we read, "But Jesus withdrew to solitary places and prayed." The key word here is withdrawn, in the plural. This means that this practice was not occasional, but habitual. Jesus, the Son of God, who had such an important mission and so little time to fulfill it, always prioritized moments of calm in prayer. He knew that the strength to accomplish what was necessary came from his peaceful communication with the Father. What can we learn from this practice of Jesus? First, the calm we seek will not come automatically in the midst of chaos. We need to make a deliberate choice to withdraw, to disconnect from the noise around us, to find the silence that nourishes us spiritually. We are often so caught up in our daily routines, responsibilities, and problems that we forget to stop. And it is in this forgetfulness that our inner peace begins to erode. Jesus' solitary prayer also teaches us that true calm is not just the absence of external noise, but a state of internal serenity. When Jesus withdrew to pray, he was not just seeking physical silence, but a deep, intimate connection with God. This storm is what allows us to face life's connections with peace. It's what strengthens our spirit and gives us clarity to make decisions and deal with challenges. In Mark chapter 1 verse 35, we see another powerful example of this habit of Jesus. Early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus cried out, left the house, and went to a deserted place, where he prayed. He didn't wait for the rush of the day to start to seek calm. He anticipated the chaos, seeking the stillness of the morning, before the demands of the world came to the surface. This example is an invitation for us to do the same. Set aside intentional moments, away from distractions, to be in prayer and meditation. But what makes these moments of solitary prayer so powerful? When we retreat to pray in silence, we create a space where God can speak to us more clearly. Without silence, without external interference, our concerns lose the power they have over us. Solitary prayer leads us to deep, introspection, where we can consider our weaknesses, fears, and also the strengthening presence of God. It is in this space that we find calm, because it is in this space that we remember who God is and who we are in Him. Modern life pushes us towards constant activity, and as a result, we often sacrifice our spirituality in the name of productivity. However, Jesus' example shows us that true spiritual productivity comes from calm, stillness. He teaches us that we cannot be truly effective in the world if we do not cultivate moments of serenity with God. Solitary prayer is not an escape from reality, but a preparation to face it with wisdom and strength. When we withdraw, like Jesus did, we can see more clearly what really matters. The rush of life makes us lose focus and become distracted by minor problems, but in the calm of prayer, our priorities align with God's. We are able to better discern what is essential and what is temporary, and that's a lesson we can apply every day. Calm is not a luxury, but a necessity. It is there that we find ourselves again, that we renew our strengths, and that we empower ourselves to continue our journey of faith. The practice of solitary prayer, then, is a path to inner peace, to calm that does not depend on situations. It is in the tranquility of God's presence that we can restore our spiritual energies and face the world with a confidence that comes from within. Number 5. Calm in the midst of suffering. Have you ever stopped to think about the kind of inner strength it takes to face suffering calmly? In our human nature, pain destabilizes us, and the instinct to fight against it becomes almost inevitable. But when we look at the example of Jesus on the cross, we see an extraordinary demonstration of serenity in the midst of the greatest suffering anyone could endure. The crucifixion was not just a painful physical event, but a time of intense spiritual and emotional anguish. Even so, Jesus appears calm, demonstrating that true peace is not lost, even when we are immersed in pain. When Jesus was crucified, he not only endured the physical pain of the nails, but also the humiliation and contempt of those around him. The soldiers mocked him, the crowds shouted, and even the 2 thieves crucified at his side insulted him. In the midst of this chaos of violence and exclusion, Jesus spoke words that still resonate as an ultimate example of calm and forgiveness. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Gospel of Luke chapter 23, verse 34. These words reveal an inner peace that transcends any external circumstance. Jesus' ability to remain calm in the midst of a situation of extreme suffering teaches us a profound lesson. Calm is not a denial of reality, but an accessible and full area that, even in the circumstances, God is still present. While on the cross, Jesus knew that his suffering had a greater purpose. He trusted God's plan, even when the pain seemed unbearable. This kind of calm comes from an unshakable trust in God's love and sovereign control, which sustains us in our darkest moments. This lesson challenges us in our own lives. How do we react when we face suffering? Pain often leads us to hopelessness, anger, or despair. We try to escape it or resist it at all costs, believing that suffering is the end. However, Jesus shows us that even in pain, we can find a peace that strengthens us. He teaches us that when we surrender our suffering to God, we can pass through Him with a serenity that confounds the world. It is not that the pain disappears, but that the presence of God in it gives us strength to resist and transcend. At another crucial moment on the cross, Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27, verse 46. This cry reveals the depth of his anguish, but also his humanity. Even though he feels the weight of abandonment, he remains firm. This teaches us that calm is not the absence of emotion or pain, but the ability to remain confident, even when everything seems dark. True serenity does not deny suffering, but embraces it with the certainty that God is present even in silence. Jesus' suffering on the cross also shows us that calm in the midst of pain is not a passive attitude. He was not simply resignedly accepting his fate, but fulfilling his mission. Jesus' calmness was an expression of his total surrender to God's will. He knew that his death was not the end, but the beginning of something much greater. The resurrection was to come, and with it, victory over sin and death. Jesus' calm on the cross was a calm grounded in hope. This is the kind of calm we are called to cultivate in our Christian walk. It is not a superficial calm that disappears when things get difficult, but a peace that comes from the deep truth that, in Christ, we have already overcome. The Apostle Paul expressed this in Romans 8:18, as he considers that the sufferings of the present cannot be compared with the glory that will be revealed in us. Jesus on the cross showed us that pain can be supported when we have a clear vision of God's eternal purpose. Therefore, the calm that Jesus demonstrated on the cross teaches us that, even in the most difficult situations, we can find peace. This peace does not come from external situations, but from an unshakable faith in God's love and purpose. It is a calm that strengthens us, sustains us, and gives us hope, even when everything around us seems to be falling apart. Just as Jesus found serenity on the cross, we are invited to seek that same calm in our own lives, trusting that God is working in all things, even without suffering. 6. Patience and calm with the disciples. How many times have you felt frustrated by not being understood, or by someone around you not meeting your expectations? In our daily lives, it is easy to lose our cool when others don't seem to understand what we are trying to convey. Now, imagine the patience that Jesus continually demonstrated with his disciples, imperfect men, full of flaws and doubts, who did not always understand his words, and they often failed in their own commitments. Yet in every situation, Jesus responds with an unshakable calm, a patience that can only be explained by a deep, transformative love. Throughout the Gospels, we see many moments when the disciples simply failed to grasp the depth of Jesus' teachings. In John chapter 14 verse 9, we have a clear example. Philip, after years at Jesus' side, asks to see the Father. Jesus responds, although corrective, is full of patience and calm. I've been talking to you for so long, Philippi, and you still don't know me. Whoever sees me sees the Father. He doesn't scream. He doesn't give up on Philip, nor does he express frustration. Instead, Jesus responds calmly, showing that patience is an essential part of love. This attitude of Jesus teaches us something fundamental about how we should deal with the failures and limitations of others. True calm is born from love. When we are moved by genuine love, we are able to look at people's flaws from a different perspective. Instead of reacting with impatience or frustration, learn to wait, guide, and agree with kindness. Jesus' patience does not mean that he never corrected his disciples, but that his corrections always came from a place of care, not anger or impatience. This type of calm is particularly important in the relationships we have with those around us, whether in family, work, or church. How many times do we get irritated by the failures of others, forgetting that we ourselves are flawed? Jesus, the only one who could complain justly, never lost his temper with his disciples. He understood that their growth was a process, that spiritual transformation takes time, and that patience is part of that process. In our own lives, we are challenged to practice this patience, recognizing that, like the disciples, everyone is constantly learning. In Mark chapter 9, verse 33, we see another example of how Jesus dealt with the immaturity of his disciples. They were arguing among themselves about who would be greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Again, Jesus does not rebuke them harshly, but teaches them calmly, using a child as an example to show that, in the kingdom of God, greatness lies in being humble. Jesus' calm transformed moments of conflict into teaching opportunities, and this is something we can apply in our daily lives. When we face situations of misunderstanding or frustration, we can choose to transform these moments into opportunities to cultivate patience and love. The patience that Jesus demonstrated with his disciples also teaches us about divine timing. We often want quick results, both in our lives and in the lives of others. But the kingdom of God does not operate on our schedule. Jesus knew that the disciples' spiritual growth would be gradual, and instead of demanding instant change, he accompanied them, guiding them step by step. This patience is a reflection of the calm that comes from trusting God's timing, knowing that each person has their own rhythm of growth and transformation. This lesson challenges us to look at the people around us with more compassion. Just as Jesus was patient with his disciples, we are called to be patient with those who are still learning, who are still in the process. Instead of demanding immediate perfection, we can offer understanding, support, and, above all, love. And in doing so, we demonstrate the same calm that Jesus showed, a calm that reflects the certainty that God is working in each person's life, even when we don't see immediate results. Therefore, Jesus' patience and calmness with his disciples teaches us that true love does not give up. He waits, he gently corrects, and he trusts the growth process. This calm is a reflection of the trust we have in God, that he is not in control of everything, including the time it takes for each person to mature spiritually. Just as Jesus never gave up on his disciples, we are called to have the same patience with others, and also with ourselves, knowing that God is always guiding us with his infinite love and patience. Number 7. Facing provocations with serenity. Imagine being in a situation where everyone around you is ready to attack you. The words are sharp, the atmosphere tense and the expectation of a confrontation is imminent. We are often led to react impulsively in moments like this, driven by anger or pressure. Now think about Jesus in the episode of the adulterous woman. He was faced with a situation of provocation and judgment, where the religious leaders placed him in a moral and legal trap. However, Jesus' calmness in the face of this trap offers us a powerful lesson about serenity in the midst of provocation. The scene described in the Gospel of John, chapter 8, is intense. The Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery before Jesus, not because they sought justice, but because they wanted to put him in a position of conflict. The law of Moses was designed so that such sin would be punished by stoning, but if Jesus approved the execution, he would be seen as callous and cruel by followers who saw him as a teacher of mercy. On the other hand, if he forgave the woman, he would be breaking the law. It was a clear trap, and everyone waited anxiously for his answer. However, Jesus, instead of reacting with haste or harsh words, bent down and began writing on the ground with his finger without saying a single word. Gospel of John, chapter 8, verse 6. This act of bending down and writing on the floor was, in itself, an impressive manifestation of calm. Jesus did not feel pressured to respond immediately. He didn't let the tension of the situation control him. Instead, he took his time, letting the silence speak for itself. Jesus' calm dismantled the aggressiveness of his accusers. They, who expected a direct answer, were faced with silence and serenity. By bending down, Jesus made everyone disarm. It's as if he said 100 words that would not be carried by the rhythm of provocation, but by the rhythm of grace. When he finally spoke, his words were disconcertingly wise. Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. Gospel of John, chapter 8, verse 7. Jesus did not deny the law, nor did he contradict what was written. He just brought out a greater truth. Everyone, without exception, is a sinner. With this simple statement, he transformed a moment of confrontation into a moment of personal reflection, and one by one, the accusers left, starting with the oldest. This scene teaches us that calmness in the face of provocation is more powerful than any impulsive response. When confronted, our natural tendency is to defend ourselves, implement our actions, or attack back. But Jesus shows us that sometimes silence and serenity have a much greater impact than any argument. The serenity that Jesus demonstrated not only protected the woman from execution, but also transformed the environment. What was a reporting setting became a space for grace and reflection. A tease is part of our daily life. At work, on social media, at home, there will always be times when we are challenged, when people try to drag us into arguments and confrontations. But just as Jesus declared, true strength lies in not being swept away by the emotion around us. Calm gives us the power to transform a tense situation into an opportunity for peace. This story also teaches us that, often, the provocations we face are traps, not only to destabilize us, but to test our faith, our character, and our wisdom. By remaining calm, we show that we are not at the mercy of situations or others, but that we are guided by an inner peace that comes from God. When we trust Him, we can respond to provocations with serenity, knowing that He is not in control. Furthermore, the episode of the adulterous woman is a powerful reminder that calm allows us to see beyond the obvious. While the Pharisees saw only the woman's sin and sought her loneliness, Jesus saw the person behind the error. He looked beyond the law and strived with his soul, and it is exactly this perspective that calm offers us. The ability to look beyond provocations and see the truth clearly. Jesus ends his interaction with the woman with a phrase that encapsulates the spirit of grace. Neither do I condemn you, go and sin no more. Gospel of John, chapter 8, verse 11. Calm brought not only a change in the environment, but an opportunity for transformation for that woman. Likewise, when we face provocations with equanimity, we not only avoid conflict, but we also create space for grace and transformation to manifest. Provocation need not be an invitation to chaos. As Jesus taught us, we can choose to respond calmly, with serenity, and above all, with the wisdom that comes from God. We live in a world where tiredness has become a constant. The daily demands are unlimited. Work, family, responsibilities, and, often, the feeling that we never do enough. How many times have you felt exhausted, without the strength to continue, carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders? This is the reality for many, trapped in a cycle of anxiety and stress. In the midst of this reality, Jesus' words resonate like a balm for the soul. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, verse 28. This statement by Jesus is not just an invitation to the afflicted of the time, but to all of us today. It's as if Jesus is speaking directly to you, knowing the depth of your tiredness, your daily struggles, and the pressure you feel. It does not ignore the weight you carry, but offers a solution that goes beyond any temporary respite the world can provide. What he offers is an inner peace, a tranquility that can only be found in him. This calm is not just about physical rest, but about deep rest, an emotional and spiritual release. Jesus continues his invitation by saying, "Take my yoke upon you, and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." Gospel of Matthew chapter 11 verses 29 and 30. What Jesus offers here is something completely contrary to what the world teaches us. The world tells us that we need to work harder, be more efficient, pursue more goals, but Jesus offers a gentle game, a way of living, that doesn't burden us, but that eases the weight of existence. By accepting Jesus' invitation, we are invited to lay down our burdens. This may seem simple, but for many it is a huge challenge. We are so used to carrying everything alone, trying to solve everything with our own strength, that we forget that we were not made to carry this weight alone. The calm that Jesus offers begins when we understand that we can let go of this burden, that he is at our side, ready to walk with us, easing up burdens. This invitation to tranquility is a call to trust. When Jesus tells us to come to him, he is not asking us to solve our problems before we come. He asks us to come as we are, tired, overwhelmed, perhaps even desperate, and trusts that he is enough to give us the break we seek. This breakup doesn't mean that all problems disappear, but it does mean that we will no longer be alone in the midst of them. He gives us strength and peace to face things with a new perspective. The image of soft play that Jesus uses is particularly significant. In Jesus' time, a game was an instrument placed on wood to plow the land, and was always made to be carried by two animals together. When Jesus talks about his game, he is inviting us to walk side by side with him. He does not ask us to carry the weight of life alone, but to walk with him, who softens that weight. By accepting Jesus' invitation, we are saying that we no longer need to fight alone, that we can trust in his strength to sustain us. This tranquility that Jesus offers also teaches us to live more lightly. We often feel confident about the expectations of others, society, or even ourselves. But Jesus teaches us that his way of life is not about external pressures, but about the peace that comes from knowing who we are in God. When we live by this principle, the concerns of the world begin to lose their power over us. We find calm in knowing that regardless of circumstances, our identity and worth are secure in Christ. Jesus' invitation is not just for a specific moment, but for an entire way of living. He calls us to live in a continuous state of calm, where the chaos of the world cannot take us off center. This calm is the result of an unshakable trust in God, who is present in every moment, taking care of every detail. When we accept Jesus' invitation, we discover that, even in the midst of life's pressures and challenges, we can live with ease, knowing that we are not alone. Therefore, this call to tranquility is an invitation to stop fighting the weight of the world with our own strength. Jesus offers us rest that goes beyond the physical. It is a rest for the soul, a peace that soothes our deepest worries. He invites us to trust him, to walk alongside him, and to experience a life where calm and serenity are not just fleeting moments, but a constant reality, regardless of the storms that may come. Number 9. Calm when faced with important decisions. How often do we feel anxious or urgent when making important decisions? The right choice seems to elude us, and the pressure of time and consequences make us act impulsively. In a society where speed is valued and indecision is seen as weakness, we are convinced that acting calmly means missing opportunities. However, Jesus' example of choosing his disciples teaches us a powerful lesson. True wisdom comes from calm and patience when faced with important decisions, and the best way to decide is to seek God's direction. When the time came for Jesus to choose those who would be his closest followers, he did not rush, even though he knew the importance of that decision. Instead of acting impulsively, he retired to a quiet place and spent the night in prayer. In those days, he retired to the mountain to pray and spent the night praying to God. At dawn, he called his disciples and chose 12 of them, whom he also appointed as apostles. Gospel of Luke, chapter 6, verses 12 and 13. Before making such a crucial decision, Jesus sought the calm of solitude and the guidance of the Father. This episode teaches us that, no matter how urgent or important the decisions we face, there is wisdom in stopping, reflecting, and seeking God's guidance. Jesus' calmness when choosing the apostles shows us that haste should not guide our choices. He knew this decision would have a lasting impact on the future of his ministry, and so he treated it with the seriousness it deserved. He did not make choices based on appearances or external pressures, but based on the stillness of prayer and the certainty that God was guiding his every step. This example also challenges us to question how are we making our own decisions. Instead of being driven by fear or anxiety about making mistakes, we are called to trust that God is in control. Often anxiety about making quick decisions comes from our own insecurity, from the belief that everything depends on us. But Jesus shows us that when we trust God with our choices, we find a calm that allows us to see. Clearly, this is not about passivity, but about a willingness to wait for the right time without giving in to haste. Furthermore, the way Jesus chose his disciples teaches us that calmness allows us to see beyond appearances. Many of those Jesus chose were not, in the eyes of the world, the best options. Fishermen, tax collectors, and common people formed the group of 12. However, Jesus was not guided by what others thought was best. His inner calm, fueled by prayer, allowed him to see potential where others saw only flaws. Calm gives us discernment to see beyond human expectations and trust in divine purpose. This lesson is particularly useful when we think about the decisions that shape our lives. Career choices, relationships, important changes. External pressures often push us to act quickly, to make decisions that seem urgent. But Jesus reminds us that the most important choices deserve time, reflection, and prayer. We don't need to rush. In the calm of communion with God, find the wisdom necessary to choose the right path. Another important point to be highlighted is that by spending the entire night in prayer, Jesus showed that true calm does not just come from physically moving away from the world, but from connecting spiritually with the Father. He did not just seek a moment of rest or reflection, but of deep communion with God. This teaches us that true calm is not simply a matter of controlling our emotions or finding a space of silence, but of seeking to build the presence of God into our decisions. This practice of Jesus challenges us to incorporate prayer into our own decisions. We are often so focused on resolving questions of our own wisdom that we forget that God is there, ready to guide us. Prayer is not just a resource in times of crisis, but must be a constant part of our lives, especially when facing important decisions. It is in the calm of prayer that our minds open to divine direction, and it is in this direction that we find the peace necessary to act with confidence. Therefore, calmness when faced with important decisions, as Jesus shows us, is not a hesitation or weakness, but a reflection of our trust in God. By seeking divine guidance before making big decisions, we position ourselves to act with wisdom and clarity. This calm protects us from impulsiveness, haste, and fear, allowing our choices to be guided by a greater purpose. And so, like Jesus, we can face life's decisions with serenity, knowing that God is always by our side, guiding us at every step. Number 10. Blessed are the peacemakers. In a world full of conflict, where the noise of discord and violence seems to be constant, peace has become a rare commodity. We are constantly confronted by divisions, whether in personal relationships, politics, or even discussing everyday trivialities. It seems that people often prefer to build walls rather than build bridges. But, amidst this scenario, Jesus left us one of his most profound teachings. During the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 9. This statement from Jesus is not just a victory for those who seek peace, but an active call for each of us. He did not say, "Blessed are those who love peace," or "Blessed are those who avoid conflict." Jesus was clear when he said peacemakers, meaning that being a peacemaker is a deliberate action, an active choice to bring calm and reconciliation where there is conflict. Being a peacemaker is, in essence, choosing calm when chaos tries to dominate. But what does it really mean to be a peacemaker? This does not simply imply avoiding confrontations or remaining neutral in the midst of discussion. Being a peacemaker, in light of Jesus' teachings, means intervening with wisdom and grace, promoting reconciliation and healing. Peacemakers are those who bring harmony where there is discord, not through force, but with the calm that comes from an unshakable trust in God. They are those who, instead of fanning the flames of conflict, prefer to put out the fire with words of wisdom, meekness, and love. This stance is challenging because it goes against our human nature. When confronted, our first thought is often to defend ourselves or revive. But Jesus invites us to a way of living that transcends impulsive reactions. The calm that he promotes in the Sermon on the Mount is a calm that transforms. He challenges us to be agents of transformation, those who, in the face of discord, do not amplify conflict, but bring reconciliation, not by force or imposition, but by the presence of God, who calms storms. Being a peacemaker also involves a willingness to listen. Conflicts often worsen because no one allows themselves to listen to the other. Without warmth of emotions, we lose the ability to understand and resolve. Jesus, in his unshakable calm, always had time to listen, even to those who came with dishonest interests. His serenity opened space for transformative dialogues. In the same way, we are called to listen with patience and discernment, confirming that, many times, the solution to a conflict begins with a simple attitude of openness towards the other. The Sermon on the Mount also reminds us that being a peacemaker is a direct manifestation of who we are in God. When we choose peace, we reflect the very nature of God. This is why Jesus said that peacemakers would be called children of God. This identity as children of God comes not just from knowing who we are, but from living in accordance with that identity. When we promote peace, we are satisfied as God acts, with grace, mercy, and love. We are bringing the kingdom of God to earth through our actions. However, being a peacemaker does not mean that we will always avoid conflict, or that it will be welcomed in all situations. Jesus, the Prince of Peace, was often rejected and even crucified. But his life shows us that even when peace seems difficult to achieve, our mission to be peacemakers remains. We are not seeking the superficial peace that pleases everyone, but the true peace that reconciles people with God and others. This peace is deep and rigorous, but it will often require courage from us to face resistance with serenity. Being a peacemaker, therefore, is a call to spiritual maturity. It is understanding that calm is more powerful than chaos, that reconciliation is more difficult, but more rewarding than separation, and that, in every situation, God is empowering us to be instruments of his peace. The calm that Jesus offers us is not passive, but active. It is a force that transforms environments, heals relationships, and, in the end, we identify ourselves as true children of God. Jesus, by proclaiming this beatitude, gave us the key to living in harmony with others. He showed us that true strength is not in gaining publicity, but in creating spaces for reconciliation. Being a pacifier means being like him. It means choosing calm when the world chooses conflict. It's bringing healing where there are wounds. And in doing so, we are truly called children of God, those who reflect divine peace in a world desperate for tranquility. 11. The calm in Jesus' gaze towards the children. In a world where we are constantly pressured to chase goals, status, and achievements, it's easy to lose sight of what really matters. We are always busy, always trying to do more, and we often forget to pause to see the value in simple things. It is in this context that one of Jesus' deepest attitudes challenges us, his calm and affection when dealing with children. In an environment where the disciples tried to push them away, thinking that Jesus had more important things to do, he welcomed him with a look of love and tranquility. This scene is an invitation to reflect on our own relationship with simplicity and innocence. In a world that values doing so much, Jesus teaches us that there is an unparalleled depth to being. When he looked at the children, he saw no interruptions or distractions. He saw a pure essence of faith and trust, qualities that adults often lose as they go through life. Jesus' calmness when interacting with children is a lesson in the importance of slowing down and appreciating the little things, those that truly reflect the nature of God's kingdom. This moment shows us that Jesus, despite being constantly surrounded by crowds and commitments, never let rush or urgency steal his calm. He always had time for children, not because they were important in the eyes of the world, but because, in the eyes of God, they represented the purity of faith. This challenges us to review how we are prioritizing our time and attention. Are we so busy with our own ambitions that we forget to value the simple and pure things that surround us? Jesus' interactions with children also teach us about the value of calm in creating specific connections. Children are not impressed by status or power. They connect with damage by welcoming them. Jesus showed that true leadership and authority does not come from an imposing posture or hasty behavior, but from a calm and loving willingness to welcome others as they are. This gesture teaches us that, to be truly great in the kingdom of God, we need to cultivate calm to receive people with the same unconditional love with which he received children. Jesus' gesture when hugging and blessing the children reveals how calm helps us see the value of the people around. Us, instead of seeing children as inconveniences or too small for the kingdom, he saw them as examples of how we should live our faith. The simplicity with which children define and love is a model that Jesus exalted. When we live in a hurry, full of worries and anxieties, we lose this quality of childlike faith, which simply trusts in God, without complications or questions. This calmness of Jesus challenges us to reflect. Are we eager to stop in the midst of the rush of life to look with love at those the world ignores? Are we ready to value what seems small, what seems simple, but which, in God's eyes, is essential? The world teaches us to chase greatness, but Jesus teaches us to embrace the purity of life that is often found in the humblest things, like the smile of a child or the unshakable trust of someone who depends completely on God. What Jesus reveals to us with this gesture is also that to find calm in our lives, we need to learn to trust like a child. Children are not worried about tomorrow, they live in the present with a natural confidence that they will be taken care of. Jesus' calmness in dealing with them reflects this spiritual truth. Trusting God frees us from anxiety and allows us to live with a serenity that only faith can provide. When we trust like children, we learn to rest in God's presence, knowing that He takes care of every detail. Just as Jesus did, we are called to live calmly, to not allow the improvement of the world to steal our ability to see the beauty in the simple, in the everyday. Children, for Jesus, were a constant reminder that the kingdom of God belongs to those who have a pure heart and genuine faith. Reaching this truth in our hearts means slowing down. It means learning to trust more and worry less. It means valuing moments of simplicity and being truly present to those God puts in our path. This calm, this look of love and patience towards children is something that we can all learn and apply in our lives. Jesus calls us to welcome others with the same tranquility, to approach God with the same confidence, and to live with a heart free from the worries that so often burden us. To be like a child in the kingdom of God is ultimately to live with the calm and confidence that we are safe in the hands of a Father who never abandons us. Number 12. Forgiveness as an act of calm. Forgiving is never easy. And the more deeply we are hurt, the harder it becomes to open our hearts to forgiveness. Anger, hurt, and the desire for revenge often take over us, blocking any attempt at reconciliation. However, when Peter told Jesus how many times he should forgive his brother, he probably thought of an acceptable limit, a reasonable amount of times. But Jesus' response was revolutionary. I do not tell you that up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, verse 22. With these words, Jesus redefined forgiveness, not as an isolated act, but as an ongoing posture of calm and compassion. By saying 70 times 7, Jesus was not simply stating a literal number. He was pointing to the need for a heart that forgives repeatedly without accounting for another's mistakes. This attitude of constant forgiveness can only be achieved through an inner calm, a full trust that forgiveness is the path to true peace. It's not about forgetting the offense or pretending it didn't happen, but about releasing the weight of hurt and resentment. Trusting that final justice belongs to God. Forgiving repeatedly requires a serenity that goes against the human instinct for self-protection. We often resist forgiveness because we realize that it makes us vulnerable, that we are allowing the other person to win or hurt us again. But what Jesus teaches us is that forgiveness actually sets us free. He takes us out of the cycle of anger and revenge that imprisons us, giving us back the calm and inner peace that can only be found when we let go of the weight of resentment. When Jesus instructed his disciples to forgive in this way, he knew how difficult it would be. This is why the act of forgiving is deeply linked to faith. The calm necessary to forgive does not come from ourselves, but from trust in God. By forgiving, we surrender control to Him, believing that, regardless of the severity of the offense, He is not in control of everything. This trust generates the serenity necessary to release hurt and prevent resentment from taking over our hearts. Furthermore, forgiveness continually reflects the character of God. In His infinite calm, He forgives us again and again, without limits. Just as He forgives us 70 times 7, we are called to do the same with others. This constant practice of forgiving not only restores our relationships, it also transforms us. Each time we forgive, we come closer to the heart of God, who is rich in mercy and slow to anger. Psalm 103 verse 8. Being able to forgive repeatedly requires a profound change in the way we see others. Instead of seeing Him as an adversary, we begin to see Him as a brother, someone who, like us, also fails and also needs grace. Jesus teaches us that forgiveness is an attitude of humility. We recognize that, just as we want to be forgiven by God, we must also extend this same grace to those who have offended us. This humility brings us calm, as it frees us from the burden of carrying other people's offenses. The calm of forgiveness also allows us to break the cycle of pain. When we don't forgive, we end up perpetuating suffering, constantly reliving the offense in our minds and hearts. However, when we choose to forgive, we release that burden and allow God's peace to fill our being. It doesn't mean that we forget the pain, but that it no longer has power over us. Forgiveness is, therefore, a path of healing, both for the one who forgives and for the one who is forgiven. Jesus showed us the transformative power of forgiveness, even in the most extreme situations. When he was on the cross, in the midst of physical and emotional pain, his words were of forgiveness. This final example of forgiveness reveals the depth of Jesus' calm, who even in the midst of suffering, chose to release the weight of his sorrow and hand everything over to the Father. If he, who was unjustly condemned and crucified, could forgive, how much more can we must forgive those we offend. Forgiveness, as an act of calm, challenges us to go beyond what is comfortable. He asks us to let go of our desire for retribution and instead offer love and mercy. This does not mean that we accept injustice or that we allow evil to continue, but we choose to trust God to deal with the situation fairly. In doing so, we find an inner peace that the world cannot offer, a peace that comes from knowing that, by forgiving, we are following in Jesus' footsteps and living according to his heart. Thus, Jesus' teaching to forgive 70 times 7 calls us to live with a calm that transcends offenses, a calm that reflects confidence in the transformative power of love and grace. This constant forgiveness is not easy, but it is freeing. He teaches us that when we forgive, we are not only blessing others, but also freeing ourselves to live in the fullness of God's peace. Number 13. Don't worry about tomorrow. In times of uncertainty, when everything seems out of control, and the future hangs like a big question mark, anxiety becomes a constant companion for many of us. Worries about what might happen tomorrow, about what we cannot predict or control, consume us. It's as if we are always on the edge of something bigger, something that threatens to destabilize us. It is in this context that Jesus' words, in the Sermon on the Mount, bring us deep comfort. So don't worry about tomorrow, because tomorrow will take care of itself. Every day is enough for your evil. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6 verse 34. This statement goes against everything we are taught to do in a society that values planning and anticipation. We are encouraged to predict the future, to ensure we are always ready for what may come. But in reality, this quest for control often creates more anxiety than peace. Jesus, however, invites us to adopt a different posture, an attitude of calm and trust in God's care. He is not saying that we should be irresponsible or ignore our obligations, but that we need to learn to surrender control of what is out of our hands. Don't worry. It is a call to free ourselves from the burden of trying to control what is not within our power. Jesus reminds us that anxiety is a natural occurrence when we try to carry the weight of the future alone. But he offers us an alternative, trusting that God is already in control of every detail, both present and future. This trust brings calm, not because we know exactly what happened, but because we know that, whatever the scenario, God is with us. Anxiety often arises from our attempt to anticipate all variables, to ensure that nothing will go wrong, but Jesus' teaching is clear. The future belongs to God, and we are not called to live in constant anticipation of what will come. Instead, we are called to live in the present, to focus on what is before us, trusting that tomorrow will be taken care of by the one who knows all things. This calm in the face of uncertainty is a test of faith, a demonstration that we truly believe that God cares for us. Jesus uses a simple but powerful metaphor to illustrate this lesson. In the same sermon, he talks about the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. They neither work nor worry, but are cared for by God. Look at the birds of the air, which neither sow nor shed nor gather into barns, and your heavenly Father feeds them. Doesn't your voice have much more value than them? Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6 verse 26. With this, Jesus reminds us that if God cares for even the small creatures of nature, how much more will he care for us, his children? This metaphor is not a denial of the need to work or plan, but a reminder that no matter how much we do, the end result is not in our hands. Anxiety arises when we try to control what is uncontrollable. But just as lilies bloom without effort and birds find food without storage, we are invited to trust in God's constant care. The calm Jesus offers us is the peace that comes from knowing we are not alone in our worries. God is working on our behalf. When we live with this calm, focused on the present, and trusting in God's care for the future, we experience an inner freedom. Anxiety loses its power because it leaves us trying to predict and control what we cannot. This attitude of confidence also transforms the way we face daily challenges. Instead of being consumed by the fear of what might happen tomorrow, learning to deal with what is before us one day at a time, knowing that each day brings its own struggles and its own dispositions. Jesus ends this passage with the phrase, "Your evil is enough every day." Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6, verse 34 with this. He reminds us that today already has its own challenges, and that it does not need to carry the additional weight of tomorrow. Calm comes when we accept the fact that tomorrow is God's responsibility and not ours. Our task is to live in the present with faith, with confidence that, whatever tomorrow brings, He will be there, guiding us and watching over us. This trust in God's care teaches us that true peace is not found in trying to control the future, but in living fully in the present, trusting in God's love. When we practice this trust, we find the calm that allows us to face life with courage and serenity. Anxiety doesn't magically disappear, but it loses its power over us when we learn to rest in the knowledge that God, the Creator of all things, is not in control. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow. It is an invitation to freedom. Jesus offers us a life free from the chains of constant worry, a life where calm is cultivated. Through trust in God, each day has its own evil, but it also has its own victories. And when we learn to fully trust in God's care, we discover that we can face whatever comes with unshakable peace, knowing that He is always by our side, watching over every detail of our path. Number 14. My peace I give you. In a world where peace is constantly threatened, whether by external conflicts or internal storms, Jesus' promise of peace stands out as one of His greatest gifts to us. He left us a peace that cannot be compared to what the world offers, something that goes beyond the absence of conflicts. Jesus, in His last words before facing crucifixion, comforted His disciples with a power-filled promise. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. It didn't fly like the world says it does. Do not let your heart be troubled, nor be afraid. Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 27. This peace that Jesus offers is an inner calm that goes beyond statistics, a state of serenity that can only be achieved through Him. The peace that the world offers is temporary, conditional. It is usually linked to moments of comfort or the absence of problems, but the peace that Jesus gives us is different. She remains even in the midst of the greatest adversity. This inner calm does not depend on external situations, but on the certainty of God's presence in our lives. Jesus knew that His disciples would face great challenges and trials, but He assured them that His peace would be enough to sustain them. It is this same peace that He offers us today, a calm that allows us to weather the storms of life with confidence. What makes this peace so special is that it comes directly from Jesus, the Prince of Peace. He offers Himself as a gift, something we cannot earn or create for ourselves. When this peace was received, it became a powerful testimony to those around us. In a world full of fear and uncertainty, the calm of those who rely on Jesus is a visible sign of God's presence. People see, through our serenity, that our trust cannot be temporary, but in something eternal and unshakable. This calm is a testimony because it defies human logic. How is it possible to remain at peace when the world around us is falling apart? The answer is what Jesus promised us. Don't let your heart be troubled. The heart of a disciple of Christ does not need to be shaken, because it is based on something greater than the challenges of this life. Fear and anxiety need not dictate our actions, for we are secure in the peace of Christ. This peace not only strengthens us, but also serves as a beacon for those who are lost in the chaos. Living with the peace of Jesus is an act of faith. It means trusting that He is in control, even when things seem out of order, and it is this confidence that generates calm. When we know that God is in charge, we can relax and face challenges differently. It's not about denying problems or pretending they don't exist, but about facing them with the certainty that we are not alone. The peace that Jesus offers us is not a promise that we will never have difficulties, but rather a guarantee that, in the midst of difficulties, He will be with us, giving us the necessary strength and serenity. This peace also transforms the way we relate to others. When we live in peace, we become agents of peace. The calm we receive from Christ empowers us to spread the same calm to those around us. Instead of being propagators of fear or conflict, we become channels of God's peace. Jesus calls us to be peacemakers. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 9. and this is only possible when we live in His peace. When we allow the peace of Christ to reign in our hearts, it overflows into our words, actions, and relationships. Furthermore, the peace that Jesus gives us is not fragile. She cannot be harmed by situations, because she does not depend on them. Many seek peace in material goods, without success or without recognition from others. But this peace is illusory. The peace of Christ, on the other hand, is unchanging because it is rooted in His presence. It is this peace that allows us to rest, even when the world around us is in turmoil. It gives us the strength to move forward, even when we don't have all the answers, because we know that God is with us every step of the way. Jesus' promise that our peace must not be disturbed is also a reminder that we can choose that peace daily. Life's worries and fears will continue to appear, but we have the choice to give these concerns to God and allow His peace to rule our hearts. When we hold on to the peace of Christ, we demonstrate our trust in Him, and that trust is one of the greatest witnesses we can give to the world. We show that our faith is not just theoretical, but practical, rooted in the reality of God's presence in our lives. Therefore, the peace that Jesus offers us is more than a momentary feeling. It is a state of being, a deep calm that transforms our way of living and dealing with life's challenges. This peace is a living testimony of God's work in us, and when we embrace it, it becomes a visible sign to the world that there is something greater and more powerful than the circumstances around us. The peace of Christ is our greatest treasure, an inexhaustible source of strength and serenity, and a constant testimony of His presence in our lives. Number 15.com in the desert. Jesus resisting attempts. Life often puts us in challenging situations, where we are faced with difficult choices and trials that test our inner strength. These are moments when calm and spiritual clarity become essential. One of the most powerful stories that exemplifies this calm resistance in the face of trials is that of Jesus in the desert. After being baptized and before beginning His ministry, Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert, where He fasted for 40 days and was tempted by the devil. Gospel of Matthew chapter 4 verse 1. In the midst of hunger, tiredness, and isolation, Jesus demonstrated an unshakable calm, showing that, even in the most adverse situations, it is possible to resist attempts with serenity. In the desert, the devil moved on Jesus in His moment of greatest physical weakness, offering quick and apparently attractive solutions. He tempted Jesus with the promise of power, provision, and recognition, trying to entice Him to act in His own interests. However, in each attempt, Jesus responded with firmness and calm, using the scriptures as His weapon. He did not rush to debate or defend Himself aggressively, but with the calm that comes from absolute trust in God, He said, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." Gospel of Matthew, chapter 4, verse 4. This calmness of Jesus in the face of temptations teaches us something fundamental. True strength is not in reacting impulsively, but in responding wisely. The desert is a metaphor for moments of trial in our own lives, where temptations arise in moments of vulnerability. Like Jesus, we are also tempted to look for shortcuts, to take the easiest path, or to act in ways that conform to the principles we know to be correct. However, the calm that Jesus demonstrated challenges us to trust that we do not need to give in to momentary pressures. What makes Jesus' calm so extraordinary is that even though He was physically exhausted, He was spiritually strengthened. Fasting and time of solitude in the desert were not moments of weakness, but of preparation. Jesus knew that His answers came not from His own strength, but from the Word of God. This complete trust in the Father is what allowed Him to maintain His serenity, even when faced with the most cunning attempts. He knew that, no matter how characteristic the devil's offerings were, there was something greater and more evident, the will of God. This same calm is available to us as we root ourselves in God's Word and prepare ourselves spiritually for life's challenges. Jesus did not react to the attempts with panic or despair, because He was sure that His purpose was in something greater than immediate satisfaction. This lesson calls us to reflect on our own responses to trials and difficulties. When we are pressured to act in ways that support our faith, we can remember Jesus' example and find calm in the knowledge that obedience to God always brings us peace and victory, regardless of relationships. Another important lesson we learn from this story is that calm does not mean inaction or passivity. When Jesus was tempted to turn stones into bread, He could have used His power to solve the immediate famine, but He chose the path of faithfulness. Jesus' calm was an active calm, a deliberate choice to trust God even when the solution seemed within reach. In our own lives, we are often tempted to take things into our own hands without waiting for God's direction. However, like Jesus, we are called to act calmly and patiently, knowing that fidelity in the present brings lasting fruit. Furthermore, the desert teaches us that attempts often arise when we are isolated or sensitive. The devil moved away from Jesus when he was alone, without human support and physically exhausted. This is a reality for all of us. Times of loneliness and weakness are often times when we are most suited. But Jesus' calmness shows us that even in these situations, we are not truly alone. The presence of God is with us, and it is in His Word that He finds the strength to resist and persevere. Jesus ended His attempts in the desert victoriously, and the angels came to serve Him. Gospel of Matthew chapter 4 verse 11. This ending shows us that when we resist attempts with calm and trust in God, He strengthens us and rewards us with His presence and care. The calm that Jesus demonstrated was a calm that came from faith, spiritual preparation, and trusting God's purpose for His life. This is the kind of calm we can all cultivate when we choose to depend on God rather than surrender to immediate pressures. Therefore, the desert is not only a place of temptation, but also of spiritual growth. Jesus teaches us that calmness in the face of temptations is not something that comes automatically, but that it comes from a life rooted in the Word of God. When we dedicate ourselves to knowing and trusting God, we find the serenity necessary to face moments of trial with courage and wisdom. And just as Jesus came out of the desert strengthened, we can also find strength and renewal when we choose calm amidst life's difficulties. Thank you very much for watching this far. I hope Jesus' teachings on the power of calm have touched your heart and brought a new perspective to your life. If you liked this video, I invite you to explore more content on my channel. We have a series of videos full of reflections and valuable teachings that will certainly add even more to your journey of faith. Don't forget to check it out. And if you haven't signed up yet, be part of this community that seeks to grow spiritually every day. Thanks again for your company, and see you in the next video.